Hello, Superboy Beyond fans. Welcome back. We're going to do one of our bonus commentaries today, a little bit of bonus content. Today, we're going off the rails a little bit, as it were, and into the final frontier. We're going to do an episode of Star Trek, the animated series. We're doing episode 1, season 1, and that is Beyond the Farthest Star. Ooh.
Which is a cool name. It's a good name for an episode. The reason we're watching Star Trek the animated series is because despite the fact that I'm a massive Trekkie and I've seen basically everything, this is the only show other than maybe Enterprise, but less to Enterprise, where there are episodes of this that I've just never seen. And until I go back and try to rewatch, I have no idea which ones I've seen and which ones I haven't. So it could be kind of fun just to jump in and I can see some new Star Trek. Well, for me, new Star Trek. So yeah, this should be fun. And I've got my little Starfleet uniform on, although I haven't got a badge yet. That is on the way. But yeah, for when we do these sci-fi beyond commentaries, I thought it would be fun to dress up a little bit for it.
Interesting note about this. Of course, it was made by the Filmation studio, which everyone knows was behind a lot of
cheap-looking animation.
Well, not cheap. We'll just say economical.
Yeah, that's a nice way of putting it. Yeah.
The studio was created and founded by Lou Scheimer and Don Christensen and Hal Sutherland, and they were in business for well over 20 years. And what actually got them started as an animated studio was the 1960s Superman, Superboy, and Aquaman, and then later Batman animated series that they did. They then branched out.
Did they do Super Friends? Was that them?
No, that was Hanna-Barbera.
Okay, it's very similar in terms of the way they were very economical with their with their animation.
But
did they do He-Man and stuff like that? It was
yes,
that then?
They later did shows like He-Man, She-Ra, Brave Star.
You can kind of tell because the way that they reuse animation constantly is very, very similar to He-Man. You know,
well,
I'm not the biggest He-Man fan, but
yeah, they did a lot of rotoscoping when it came to their animation. So that's why a lot of the movement looked very fluid and realistic because it was all rotoscoped. And then, yes, they did reuse a lot of cells and stuff.
Yeah, like they'd have the same shot of them walking and they would just swap out the backdrop a lot of the time. Like, let's face it, though, for stuff like conversational scenes, especially with a show like Star Trek, that's got a very, it's got a visual style that's very specific to Star Trek. It doesn't, at least until the modern era, it didn't really differentiate very much in terms of its cinematography.
Right.
So if you're going to get a studio that is that economical with their animation to work on a show, Star Trek's probably one of the better ones for them to do it with. I seriously doubt it would have worked if they wanted to make a Star Wars series, because let's face it, early low budget Star Wars animated shows weren't the best, Yeah. Although I did own a few episodes of Droids on VHS when I was a kid. I don't think I watched it more than once though.
Yeah.
Should we get into this?
Yeah. Before we get started, though, for those of you just joining us for the first time, you will not see the actual episode anywhere in the video. This is not a standard, reaction video. You're just going to see us. There might be a little bit of a heavily
filtered let's
Yes,
say.
heavily filtered version of the episode, right in the middle, up there. Up there. That's just so you can keep in track with us.
Yeah, it's basically made out of black and white dots. There's absolutely zero chance that anybody is watching our commentary as a replacement for the officially available sources.
Yeah.
Usually the thing, the studios look out for.
Yep. So I'm going to count you in with a 3, 2, 1, and energize, since it's Star Trek.
Okay.
And then we'll get started. So get your DVD or your streaming version ready. And remember, it's season 1, episode 1, Beyond the Farthest Star. I'm going to count you in. 3, 2, 1, energize. One thing I like about the opening sequence here is that it is very much like the original series.
Yeah.
Filmation.
You can tell they're trying very hard to show, like, this isn't just, a kid's version of Star Trek. This is basically just more Star Trek. The fact that kids can enjoy it.
The only difference here is that they couldn't use the original theme song.
But, it's funny because people talk a lot about like which Star Trek show has the best theme. And a lot of people, it's funny, a lot of people will say like Voyager's not the best Star Trek show, but it maybe has the best theme tune. Yeah. I don't know whether I necessarily agree with that, but this is a seriously underrated version of a Star Trek intro theme. I don't think it's as grand and, it's not as big as the other ones. The other ones, you can tell they are recorded with a larger orchestra.
Yep.
I think it's a very good theme.
Yeah, this is written by Samuel Peoples, who is known for some episodes of the original series. He was also a very prolific TV writer. And if I'm not mistaken, he also wrote episodes of Batman in the 60s. And he was the writer of the Flash Gordon movie in 1980.
That's cool. It's funny, like it's a name that I recognize, but I couldn't tell you from what specifically.
Yeah.
But it's quite possible I just know it from Star Trek,
Yeah.
One thing I will give this show as well, I like the use of like the camera angles that they choose, like for the that high angle shot of the bridge there where you can see the entire bridge at once. It looks really cool. It's a nice looking camera angle, and it does mimic the sort of camera angle you would see on the show occasionally.
Yep.
More so, I think, early on before the budget was slashed a little bit, but
yeah, the likenesses of the crew members is as spot on as possible for animation.
Yeah,
it's not perfect. But it is all of the original crew members except for Walter Koenig.
Although, didn't he come in to do some guest voices later on?
No, he actually only wrote one episode, and that was The Infinite Vulcan.
I'll be honest, Chekhov was never my favorite character anyway.
The Infinite Vulcan, though, is an episode that is referenced in Lower Decks.
That's cool.
There's an episode where they find a giant Spock skeleton.
I remember that, yeah.
And that's what that is from. So they replaced Chekhov, with a character called Lieutenant Arex, who is the rather large gentleman sitting next to Sulu.
Yeah, which, I like the fact that because it's animation, they could do a little bit more in terms of the creature design for the aliens.
Yep.
They wouldn't have been able to pull that off at this point in, the timeline. There's no way. If they tried to do that practically in live action back then, they would have utterly failed. So the fact that they said, like, we're in, this is an animated show, we can basically do what we like. I'm glad that they did things like that. And isn't there like a cat-looking woman as well that's on the crew later on?
Yes, there is Lieutenant Mares. She's the alternate communications officer. She's a Cation.
She looks just vaguely like they were reusing character designs from He-Man. maybe.
Well, she predates He-Man by about 10 years, so
Oh, well, then maybe they reused her for He-Man. I don't
possibly.
know. Her character design, I always just thought that looks right out of something like He-Man.
Yep.
Something fantasy related.
And the design on this alien ship that they find is that is utterly, for lack of a better term, alien.
Yeah. Really, really cool. And I think they probably could have done that in live action, but it probably would have been one of their more expensive episodes.
Oh yeah.
And that's something they did on this as well. Like, they knew that while the animation quality wasn't the greatest, they knew that with the backdrops and stuff, they could get like those. I don't know who the artists were that they had working on these shows, but the fact they painted these like grand backdrops, these giant, great big sets, would have been impossible to do in live action at that time. Even in a movie, it would have been near impossible. Although I guess the Vija stuff looks pretty decent in the motion picture, so maybe they could have done it. Would have been bloody expensive though.
Yeah.
They knew their limitations, but they also knew where they could take things up a notch. And I think there's something to be respected about that.
Yeah. And Lieutenant Arex is voiced by James Doohan himself.
He voices a lot of people in this show, if I remember right.
He voices a lot of people in the show. Majel Barrett voices a lot of people in the show.
I wonder why Roddenberry didn't like the animated series. I guess he was just kind of jealous that Fontana was running things. But I mean, if Majel Barrett was in it, you can't have hated it that much.
Yeah, I don't know if it's so much that he hated the show. It's just
he didn't like that he wasn't the one in charge of it, I suppose.
Yeah.
Which is part of the drama when TNG started off. Like, he could feel that his control was slipping a little bit.
Yeah, but the problem is he was getting older and he wasn't in the best of health by TNG.
And that lawyer of his certainly wasn't helping things.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, you look at this set design, I mean,
there is no way they would have been able to do this in live action in the 60s.
No. The only way it could have been pulled off is purely if, they shot the episode, realized they couldn't actually air it because it was impossible to finish, and then maybe got the people that did the remastered visual effects for the Blu-ray and stuff, where they redid it in CGI. Yeah. That's basically the only time they'd be able to finish this episode in live action. They wouldn't have been able to do it in the 60s.
Yeah, and interesting note here is that they're using a new piece of technology, which is the life support belt.
Which I was always sad that piece of tech didn't really come back very often. I think wasn't it referenced at some point in TNG, but I don't remember when. I vaguely remember something. I remember someone wearing it. I think Picard wore one once.
Yeah.
Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I,
And the only reason why they did the life support belt is because they wanted to save a little bit of money and not have to animate the environment suits.
Yeah. Yeah, just adding the belt to what they've already got for the other characters. Very clever idea.
Yeah, and that little aura around them. I will say this, when it comes to the actual Starfleet gear, Filmation did a damn good job, translating it.
Definitely.
I mean that scene just like now with the tricorder. I mean, it's amazing.
Yeah, and it's not even just visually. I appreciate the fact that they've got the correct sound effects. Like, nothing sounds totally off. I don't know if in future episodes of this, where there are episodes where the sound effects are completely wrong, but for the moment, they seem to be getting it right.
Yeah, I think the only
back to what you said,
the only sound effect they don't get right, I think, is the phasers.
Oh, that's a shame. One thing with what you were saying earlier about the character designs being about as good as you could expect from this, I think the best looking character is definitely McCoy, because all they needed was the bags under his eyes, and it's McCoy.
Yeah.
Like, he's the easiest one to get right. Like, of all the characters, yeah, that's the one that looks closest. And how cool is it, by the way, that they're doing the very short Treks animated series now? And it's like 4-minute episodes in this style. Just, I love that they brought back this style for some new Star Trek.
Yeah.
Probably to save money, partly, but I think it was something to do with an anniversary or something.
Yeah, I think we're coming up on the 50th anniversary of the animated series.
Yeah, what was this, 70, 73?
73, 74.
Yeah, so, yeah, 50 years. Bloody hell. Although you can kind of tell how old this show is. Of all the Star Trek shows, this didn't age the best. But you can say that about the original series too. They both have their own charms, though.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
But yeah, they would have no way of building this set back in the 60s.
Hell, they couldn't really even do it on a TV budget now.
I don't know. The Strange New Worlds budget probably could get away with it. They have some pretty incredible looking planets. Especially now with that, the giant screen thing that goes in the background, so they wouldn't have to do it all on green screen. I imagine they'd be able to do it. Take a hell of a lot of prep, though.
Yeah.
And I do like that they actually went far enough to give Spock slightly more yellowish skin to imitate the whole Vulcan green-blooded thing that the original series had. Although it's quite funny, really thinking about it, that by TNG, I think they basically just abandoned making Vulcans look slightly green, because I can't remember them doing it after that. Certainly, I don't remember old man Spock having makeup to look yellow.
Yeah. The only time they really did that was in the original series.
Mm. But I always liked the idea that they put across when they did Voyager. Some people were saying, "Oh, we've never seen a black Vulcan before, so how is Tuvok possible?" It's like, I mean, Vulcan's a pretty big planet. You don't think they have slightly different races of Vulcan?
Yeah, and
I mean, come on.
here's the problem with that statement of we've never seen a black Vulcan before.
How many Vulcans have we seen? At this point,
we have actually seen a black Vulcan before.
Wait, there wasn't there one at the beginning of the motion picture when Spock is taking the Kolonar?
Not in the motion picture. It was in Star Trek V during the recreation of Amanda's giving birth to Spock scene.
Huh.
One of the midwives.
But we had seen them before, so people were just causing, people were causing problems for no good reason. I guess
one of the midwives
thing has happened.
One of the
midwives
still goes on. African American. So, or sorry, African Vulcan.
It still goes on today, though. I remember when even Discovery season 2 was coming out, and they were saying, "Oh, how are there so many women on the bridge?" Pike had never seen a woman on the bridge; he wasn't used to it. And it's like, "Oh, come on! I mean, really?
Yeah.
It's the Federation. It's Starfleet. It's supposed to be a utopia. You don't think they're beyond casual sexism at this point? I mean, really?" But sometimes you have to just admit that little things like that are purely there as a result of when the show was made. It's nothing to do with the actual universe the show is creating. Stuff is never going to age. There's always going to be something that ages poorly. I'll just look at the first couple of seasons of TNG. There's a whole bunch of really offensive episodes.
Mostly season 1. Mostly.
We've talked about this before.
Yeah.
Won't get into it now.
And of course, we've got the typical trope here of an alien, an energy alien comes aboard and starts wreaking havoc. Now, this time it takes over the ship.
I always like episodes where an alien entity takes over the ship. It's just, it's funny because in the original show, this sort of episode was usually done to save money. They were bottle episodes. It was just set on the ship and that was it. Existing sets. That's all it was. And it would save them a ton of money because they wouldn't have to do shots of the ship flying and all that. In this, they're just doing it because it's a fun sort of story to tell. And you can tell that they don't have the limitations just purely by virtue of where they found this energy being. That giant, impressive looking structure.
Yep. And of course, the voice of the alien is again performed by James Doohan.
How many voices did he do on this show? Must have been like 50. It's like every time they had a random voice that needed doing, it was like, "Hey, Jimmy, do you want to do this one?"
Well, it was either him, Majel, George, or Nichelle who did background voices.
Yeah.
Although there was one episode where they had a new character, and it was not voiced by any of them. They actually brought in actor Ted Knight for a voice.
I love Ted Knight.
And this was not his first foray into working for Filmation. He was many voices on the old Batman and Superman and Superboy and Aquaman cartoons that they did.
Very cool. See, I only really know Ted Knight from Caddyshack, and he's just bloody hilarious in Caddyshack. But yeah, he did a Superman animated show. I'm seeing he played Perry White in the New Adventures of Superman. Yeah, the 66 to 1970.
That's the show I'm talking about. That's the Filmation show.
That's cool.
But he was also
Clark
he was also the voice of Pa Kent in the Superboy segments.
Very cool. Yeah, I like Ted Knight. It's cool that, I guess he had a good working relationship with the studio.
Yeah. He was also part of the scam that Lou Scheimer performed when he was trying to get the job of working on Superman.
I don't even know.
Well, Ted Knight was brought in, to act as, a director in a room because they were trying to make it look like this was an actual functioning TV studio. Okay. Yeah. And because this would have been their first job, they didn't have anything else. So they brought in all friends that they had from, Warner Brothers and Hanna-Barbera and all the other companies. And they said, just act like you're doing something. And, Mort Weisinger walked through the studio with them, and he saw Ted Knight in one room, and he was acting like a director. And he said, "You guys got the job." And then later, Lou admitted to Mort, "Yeah, we kind of pulled a fast one on you just so we could get the job." Mort was not very happy about that.
It happens, There are stories like that throughout Hollywood history, I'm sure.
Yep. And
it's funny. Like sometimes I think the Kirk model looks like Shatner. Other times I think he looks nothing like him. It's a very strange one with Shatner's look in this. Scotty always typically looks like Scotty. I don't know. Partly, Scotty had slightly different hair in the later seasons of Star Trek, if I remember right.
Didn't he grow the mustache eventually? Season 1 Scotty.
Yeah, I wish that they'd made him look more like the season 3 Scotty. Just purely because it doesn't make that much sense in the timeline. It would even be cool if they gave him a mustache, just to make it a cool little connecting thing between the original series and motion picture. But I mean, I guess they didn't know he'd have a mustache in the motion picture. So
yeah, and it's very interesting that this show formed a friendship between James Doohan and Lou Scheimer, and that's why James Doohan actually went on to work for Lou Scheimer on their TV show Jason Star Command, which
Hmm.
he had to leave after the first season because they were getting ready to film the motion picture.
Hmm.
A lot of people refer to this show as Trek Light.
I think that's a little bit too harsh. I think it is absolutely Star Trek.
Yeah, this is Star Trek the way it should have been done, in the 60s. Unfortunately, because of budgetary constraints, they couldn't do, the aliens the way they needed to.
Mm. And I've got to say as well, it's kind of an achievement in itself that they even have Nimoy voicing Spock in this show. Because let's face it, I mean, how many problems did they have trying to get him to agree to do the motion picture? I mean, there was
Yeah.
that whole business with the cereal boxes and stuff. Like there was the billboard ads and stuff, and the studio was using his likeness to make money and not cutting him in. Like it's kind of amazing that he returned to do this show because it's
Well,
funny. I see making of things and like the timeline of Star Trek's production, and people always seem to skip from original series to motion picture and talk about all the Nimoy stuff that happens between. They never talk about the animated series for some reason.
we got to remember something. The animated series was done before his problems with Paramount.
Okay. I thought it was around the same time, so
It was just before his problems with Paramount, and that's why when they were going to do the second Star Trek series, Phase 2, that's why they were kind of writing him out of the series.
Yeah. I do feel bad for the guy that was going to play the character. What was the other Vulcan's name? Zahn, was it?
Yeah, Zahn.
Yeah, I always feel bad
David
for that
Gautreaux.
guy. Yeah, and he was going to be one of the leads on a new Star Trek series, and he was basically ended up getting just a tiny cameo in the motion picture. I always felt bad for that.
Yeah, there was an article
you see
in
documentaries, interviews with him, and you can tell that he was passionate about the role. Like he wanted to do a good job. So it's shame they couldn't find a regular role for him when they did TNG.
Yeah, he probably would have made a pretty good Data.
Maybe.
But
let's face it though, they had Vulcans on TNG on the cast. They had that one guy that was the son of one of the producers, and then he played another Vulcan on Voyager, but they changed the name so it wasn't the same character.
Yeah.
I don't think it was
now retconned that the two characters are cousins.
Oh, they did they?
Yeah.
Okay. I never liked that guy as a Vulcan. I always thought he was maybe the worst Vulcan in the franchise. Maybe if they had the guy that was going to play Zahn in that role, it would have been slightly better.
Well, at that point, that was like season 6, maybe 7. That was the episode Lower Decks.
Right.
So,
yeah.
He would have been way too old. But there was an article in.
But, in Voyager, though, it didn't have to be a young Vulcan. They could have had an older Vulcan on the crew. Yeah. I would have watched it.
Yeah, there was an article in Starlog magazine some years after the movie, and they actually interviewed David Gautreaux, and he says, I sat down with Leonard Nimoy once, and Leonard Nimoy just said, look, I don't hold anything against you. You were taking a job. I was having problems with.
But why would Nimoy have problems with him though?
Well,
Nimoy turned down the job, so they hired someone else. Why would Nimoy hold it against him?
There was rumors going around that Nimoy had a problem with it.
Well, that's stupid. He turned down the role.
Yeah.
I love Leonard Nimoy, don't get me wrong, but come on. You're not the only guy in the world that can play a Vulcan.
Yeah.
Back then, I guess if they wanted a lead Vulcan in a show, it was kind of a big deal. But maybe it's just because now I've seen so many Vulcans. It doesn't seem like an issue. But I guess back then, things were a little bit different.
Yeah. Old Hollywood, as it were.
Yeah. Or the old fan base, even. There was how many people when TNG was announced were like, Star Trek isn't Star Trek without Kirk, Spock, and McCoy. And there are people that still to this day as well still dislike TNG because they're like, no, only the original is Star Trek. All the others, it's just imitation. There are still people that feel that way.
Well, I
Less
don't
less
feel
of
that way.
them, I think, but it happened for a while.
Personally, yeah, personally, I don't feel that way. I just think that, season one and half of season two of TNG was just not as good as it could have been.
Yeah. I mean, the first two seasons of TNG are pretty shocking. Season two is better, but the loss of Dr. Crusher, it kind of puts a dampener on things a little bit. It's not until season three when the show really became good.
Yeah, that's when we got the introduction to the Borg.
That's when we had the Borg. Crusher was back, although it took a little while for Crusher's character to get back to doing some good things because you could tell that they were just replacing the name and it was all supposed to be what was it, Dr. Pulaski's character. So Crusher's like talking to Data like he's a piece of shit, which is apparently Gates McFadden was just like, this Crusher would never talk like this. Like, it's obvious you're just taking her character and giving it to me. Yeah.
Yeah, and there was really no explanation given as to why Pulaski left.
Yeah, I don't think anybody minded particularly. I don't think anyone really liked Pulaski. I'm sure she has her fans saying that, actually. I'm sure there are people out there that did like her. I'm not one of them. I'm fine that they never gave an explanation. I do think it's a bit of a shame that they never brought her back for another episode, though. Like, it might have been cool to have her in as a guest star for an episode in, like, season 5 or 6, just to see what she's doing. Because, let's face it, by that point, they knew what the show was, so potentially they could write a pretty good episode for her and maybe even get the character just a little bit of redemption in the eyes of the fans.
Yeah. But by the time of season 5, that's when Batman the Animated Series was on, and she did have Diana Muldaur had a recurring role in Batman.
Who was she in Batman?
Dr. Leslie Tompkins.
Really? Okay,
Yes.
I didn't know that. That's the funny thing with animation. Like, until someone points out who's voicing a character, I mean, often by the time the credits come round, I'm thinking about the episode so much, I'm not reading the names,
There's a lot of Star Trek connections in Batman the Animated Series. The one of the first villains that Batman faces off in the first two-parter, the Cat in the Claw, the Red Claw, that's
who's
Janeway.
Okay, it's been a very long time since I've seen that episode. I was a kid when I saw that episode. I think if I saw it now, I would recognize her voice immediately because, Kate Mulgrew has...
remember, she's also putting on a very thick French accent.
I think I'd still be able to recognize her voice, though. Yeah, maybe it would. I'll tell you what it would sound like if I'm picturing now Kate Mulgrew doing a French accent. I just picture all those Comic-Con panels where she's telling the story about what happened with the original Janeway.
Yeah,
she's like, oh yeah, she was great. She was good. She wasn't great with the schedule and all of this. The biggest problem, she couldn't say engage. She said engage, and yeah.
Well, she's French. I mean, come on.
It's funny though because I love those Comic-Con panels, like, but one where I saw Kate Mulgrew telling that story, it was funny to actually see one of the other actors on stage say, "Okay, one, you weren't there because you were hired after she left, so you wouldn't know this. Two, I was on set with her. That's not what happened." They just kept breaking down everything that Kate Mulgrew had just said and said, actually, I think maybe Rick Berman had told you a lot about the reasons she was let go. I don't think most of them were true. But I guess it's a similar story to the whole Salkind thing with Superboy. Oh, we wanted to make season 5. We wanted to make a movie and all of this. And it's like, then Mike Carlin comes around and says, no, actually, it was always meant to be 4 seasons. It was never going to go beyond that,
Right.
And all of this. So I guess it's one of those things that different people tell different stories and it just happens. But it does always make me laugh. I love the Voyager Comic-Con panels. They're so much fun.
As Obi-Wan put it, what I told you is true from a certain point of view.
Absolutely. But no, anybody out there that's a Trek fan that doesn't watch Comic-Con panels on YouTube, maybe just because you don't have much interest, if you're going to watch a cast on a Comic-Con panel, Voyager's usually the one to watch because, man, that was a funny crew. Like them telling their stories about being on set, some of the funniest stuff I've ever seen. Oh man, there's one Comic-Con panel and it's got Kate Mulgrew and Robert Beltran talking about the episode where Chakotay and Janeway are stuck on a planet, and he's saying like, yeah, I was there. I was trying to get lucky with the captain. I was there. I was giving her shoulder massages, offering to rub her feet, and she's just like, all she cared about was the fucking monkey. It's just all going on. And Kate Mulgrew was just telling the story. She was like, oh yeah, I'm on a planet with a handsome man. Oh, look, a monkey. And it's just some of the funniest stuff ever. If you're a Star Trek fan and you've not watched some of these Voyager panels that you can find on YouTube, give it a go. It's so funny. And I actually think I have a deeper appreciation for Voyager as a result of watching those stories. But I need to, one second, quickly do the Picard maneuver because I'm noticing I'm getting more and more creases. But I think that's it. That was Beyond the Farthest Star, the first episode of Star Trek the Animated Series. Don't know when we'll be watching another episode of this. We just felt like watching something different this week. So we watched our bonus episode, which was the Batman Animated Series one, followed by this. They'll probably be released a few weeks apart just to see how it goes. But don't know what we'll be doing as a bonus show next. Maybe we'll do another Star Trek or another Batman, or maybe we'll go back to the Ruby Spears show. Maybe we'll do another episode of Stargate. Who knows? But we'll see you next week.